and welcome to the SAE-VIT podcast. Welcome back to the Padlock Intel. I am Nidhi. Usually, when we talk about Formula One legends, we are talking about decades of dominance Ferrari, McLaren, Williams. We talk about dynasties that spanned generations. But today, we are talking about a ghost, a team that existed for exactly one season, won absolutely everything, and then vanished.
It's the greatest one-hit wonder in the history of sports. Nidhi, it's not just motorsports. Sports. Period.
Exactly. We are talking about the Brawn GP, the team that cost £1 to buy and delivered a world championship. Joining me to dissect this fairy tale, which, as we'll find out, was actually a nightmare of stress and engineering panic, is our resident expert, Daksh. Welcome back.
It's great to be here. And you're right, fairy tale is the word everyone uses. But when you look at the engineering, it was more like a horror movie where the monster turns out to be the good guy.
A horror movie with a happy ending, maybe. But we have to start with the horror. Let's set the scene. December 2008. The world is melting down. The global financial crisis is ripping through the economy. Lehman Brothers has collapsed, and in Tokyo, the board of Honda Motor Company makes a decision that sends a shockwave through Formula One.
It was December 5th. I remember it vividly. Honda announced they were pulling the plug. Immediate effect, no one last season, no winding down, just gone. You have to understand, Honda wasn't just a team, they were a colossus. They had an annual budget estimated at $300 million. They had 700 staff in Brackley, and overnight they were all effectively unemployed.
That is devastating. And from what I understand, the timing couldn't have been worse technically.
Absolutely, that was the real tragedy from a technical perspective. Honda had been terrible in 2007 and 2008. The RA107 and RA108 were, well, they were dogs, slow, clumsy cars. But Ross Brawn, who had joined late in the game, had realized early on that 2008 was a lost cause. He basically threw the 2008 season in the bin to focus entirely on the new regulations for 2009.
So, they had been spending hundreds of millions developing a car for a season they wouldn't even compete in.
Exactly. They had three distinct wind tunnels programs running. They were testing aerodynamic concepts that nobody else had even thought of. When the lights went out at the factory in December, sitting there in the dark was arguably the most expensive, most developed car in Formula One history. But it had no engine, no badge, and no owner.
So, Honda wants out. They want to avoid the bad PR of firing 700 people. But they also can't justify the cost. Enter Ross Brawn and Mick Fran. Dux, talk us about the deal of the century.
It's legendary. Ross Brawn buys the team for £1, a single pound coin. But that's the headline. The reality was a management buyout, MBO, born of desperation. If Honda closed the doors, they would have had to pay redundancy packages, sever contacts with Jensen Button, who was on a massive salary, and pay penalties to suppliers. It would have cost them roughly $100 million just to shut down.
So Ross makes them an offer. Give us the money you'd spent on shutting down, and we'll keep the team alive.
Precisely, Honda provided a dowry about $100 million in cash to run the team for a year, plus the facilities. But in exchange, Ross Brawn took on all the liabilities. If the team went bust in June, it was on Ross's head and not Honda's.
But $100 million in F1 is not a lot of money, is it? Not compared to Toyota or Ferrari spending $400 million.
Well, it's peanuts. And this is where the fairy tale gets critical. They had to slash the workforce. They went from 700 people down to about 430. It was brutal. People who had worked together for years were being let go.
I remember hearing a story that perfectly sums up this era. The story of Gary Holland, the plumber, right?
Yes, that's one of the best anecdotes. Gary was the team's gearbox specialist and chief refueler. He took voluntary redundancy during the collapse because he needed stability. He literally started a plumbing business. But then they get to the first race in Melbourne and the pit stops are slow. They don't have the muscle memory.
They realized they couldn't compete without him.
Right, Ross Brown realizes that they couldn't compete like this. So he calls Gary personally. He says, Gary, what's your day rate? And they hired him back as a weekend warrior. He would plumb houses in Oxford during the week, fly EasyJet to the Grand Prix on Thursday, refuel the car on Sunday, and be back to fixing toilets on Monday.
Now that is the definition of Gargasta spirit.
And speaking of EasyJet, that wasn't a joke. Under Honda, the engineers flew business class, stayed in five-star hotels. Well, in 2009, Ross Brawn, the team principal, was seen queuing for EasyJet flights with the fans. They wore plain clothing because they didn't have the team kit yet. They were scraping by.
Let's get technical, Daksh. We have a car designed for a Honda engine. But Honda took their engines with them. They managed to secure a supply of Mercedes V8s at the last minute. How hard is it to swap an engine in an F1 car?
Well, in modern F1, it's virtually impossible. The engine isn't just a power unit, it's a stressed member of the chassis. The suspension bolts to the gearbox, which bolts to the engine. The Honda engine and Mercedes engine were completely different shapes. The mounting points didn't line up, and the heat rejection was very different.
So, what did they do?
They performed surgery. They literally had to cut about 6 inches, 150 millimeters, off the back of the carbon fiber monocoque. They don't just cut a monocoque, it compromises the structural integrity. They had to pound a few months in.
And the gearbox?
That was another nightmare. The Mercedes engine crankshaft sat at a different height than the Honda gearbox input shaft. They didn't have the money to build a new gearbox, so they machined a bespoke spacer, a metal ring, to bridge the gap. They also had to completely redesign the rear suspension geometry because the engine sat differently.
It sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. A cut and shut chassis with a spacer in the transmission.
Well, on paper, it should have vibrated itself to pieces. It should have handled like a shopping cart. The center of gravity was too high, and the car was overweight because they couldn't use ballast to balance it. Ross Brown later admitted, there are things on this car that are just not good.
But it wasn't just good. It was a rocket ship. Why?
Two words, double diffusal, or if you want to be precise, the exploitation of a loophole by a Japanese engineer named Masayuki Minagawa. This is the controversy of the season.
And how did it work?
The 2009 rules were meant to slash downforce. They limited the height of the rear diffuser. But Minagawa-san realized the rules applied to the surface of the floor. What if you put a hole in the floor? You could channel air to a second higher deck.
So essentially, while everyone else built a one-story house, Braun built a two-story house because the rules didn't say you couldn't have a second floor if you used a ladder.
A perfect analogy. It gave them huge downforce at the rear, but there was another secret weapon nobody talks about, the outwash front wing.
Please explain that.
The rules wanted to force air inboard or over the tires. Braun's aero team, led by Loy Bigoy, designed end plates that forced the air outboard around the tires. This pushed the turbulent, dirty air away from the floor, sealing the diffuser. That front wing was just as important as the diffuser. It made the BGP 001 stable. predictable and fast in every type of corner.
They show up to testing in Barcelona. The car is plain white with a fluorescent yellow stripe. It looks like a generic rental car, and then Jensen Button hits the track.
And the paddock went silent. On the third day of testing, Button did a 119.1. The Ferraris and McLarens were doing 120s or 121s. He was a full second faster.
But the rivals said it was a glory run, right? That they were running on fumes to attract sponsors.
That's what they hoped actually. The reality was terrifying. James Vowles, the chief strategist who is now the Williams team principal, later revealed that they were actually running with full fuel.
Wait, they were sandbagging.
They were sandbagging hard. They were so fast that they were scared the FIA would ban the car immediately if they showed their true pace. They added ballast, filled the tank, and Jensen was still a second faster.
Fast forward to Melbourne, the first race, qualifying.
It was a bloodbath. Button pole, Barrichello P2, a front row lockout for a team that didn't exist 3 weeks prior. And then the race, a 1-2 finish. It was the first time a new team won on debut since Mercedes in 1954.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. That race saw the birth of the Virgin sponsor.
Yes, Richard Branson turned up. He's a master of PR. He saw Brawn was hot property and signed a cheap deal, reportedly $250,000 per race, to slap Virgin stickers on the car. He got millions of dollars of exposure for pennies.
But behind the scenes, the Piranha Club was attacking. Flavio Briatore at Renault, Luca di Montezemolo at Ferrari, they were furious about the diffuser.
They appealed to the FIA International Court of Appeal. The hearing was in April. Ferrari's lawyer actually called Ross Brawn a person of supreme arrogance for thinking his interpretation was right and everyone else was wrong.
Imagine calling Ross Brawn, the man who won 7 titles with Schumacher, arrogant on technical matters.
Exactly, the FIA ruled in Brawn's favor. The diffuser was legal, and that ruling effectively handed Brawn the first half of the season.
Jensen Button wins 6 of the first 7 races. He calls the car the monster after winning in Turkey. It looks like the easiest championship in history, but then the summer happens.
This is where the lack of money hit them. Red Bull, with Adrian Newey, had an unlimited budget. They redesigned their entire car to include a double diffuser. They brought updates to every race. Braun brought, well, nothing. They had no budget for parts.
And I understand there was a fundamental flaw in the Brawn car regarding temperature.
Right, BGP 001 was very gentle on tires, great at the hot races like Bahrain, but in the cold, at Silverstone and Nürburgring, the tires were blocks of ice. They just couldn't switch them on.
Silverstone was a low point. Button finished 6th, Vettel won. The gap was closing, and this is where the psychology comes in.
Jensen Button was spoken about this openly. He said that the period was torture. He stopped driving to win. He started driving not to lose. He was counting points, watching Vettel and Webber. He lost his aggression.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Rubens wakes up.
Rubens was furious. In Barcelona, he accused the team of favoring Jensen to strategy. In Germany, after a bad pit stop, he publicly said, "They made me lose the race. I want to go home." He was fighting for his career, and suddenly, he started winning. He won in Valencia, an emotional win dedicated to Felipe Massa, who had a horrible accident in Hungary. Then, he won at Monza.
Monza was a strategic masterpiece, wasn't it?
It was. The team realized they lacked straight line speed against the KERS cars. So they put Rubens on a one-stop strategy while everyone else did too. He drove the wheels off that car.
But the tension inside the team must have been insane. You have the owner, Ross, trying to keep the lights on. You have Jensen spiraling with anxiety. You have Rubens in full rebellion mode.
And they are running out of parts. Jensen used the same chassis, BGP 001 and O2, for every single race of this season. If he had crashed it heavily in practice in Japan or Brazil, well, game over. They didn't have a spare ready to go. They were walking a tightrope over a canyon.
It all comes down to Brazil, the penultimate race. A tropical storm delays qualifying for nearly 3 hours.
It was chaos. Jensen makes a bad call on tire pressures and qualifies 14th. Rubens, the hometown hero, is on pole position. The script was flippant. If Ruben wins and Jensen scores nothing, the title fight goes to Abu Dhabi.
Jensen later said he sat in his hotel room that night staring at the ceiling, thinking he had thrown it all away. But the next day, the monster returned.
The race drive was incredible. He made moves that were uncharacteristically aggressive for Jensen. He drove down the inside of the Kobayashi into turn 1. Kobayashi was the rookie, making his debut for Toyota, and he was fighting like a maniac. Jensen risked everything on that move.
While Jensen was charging, Rubens was sinking.
He had a slow puncture after contact with Lewis Hamilton. He dropped to 8th, Jensen finished 5th, and that was enough.
The radio message: We are the champions.
Jensen's singing queen. It was terrible singing, but pure, unfiltered joy. Ross Brawn was crying on the pit wall. The plumber Gary Holland was crying in the garage. They had done the impossible.
And then, almost as quickly as it started, it ended. Mercedes brought the team.
Financials were staggering. Ross bought the team for 1 month. They won the title. Mercedes and Abar Investments bought 75.1% of the team in November 2000. The team was valued at over $100 million. Ross and the directors paid themselves a $20 million dividend immediately. It was the greatest flip in business history.
But the legacy is what matters. Brawn GP didn't just disappear.
No, they became Mercedes AMG Petronas, the chassis codes for the Mercedes cars that Lewis Hamilton drove to 6 titles. They start with the W, but the infrastructure, the people, James Vowles, Andrew Chauvelin, Ron Meadows, they were all Brawn survivors. The Brawn GP001 was the seed that grew into Mercedes dynasty.
It proved that efficiency, clarity of purpose, and bit of a gangster spirit could beat the corporate giants. It's a story we will likely never see again in modern budget-capped franchised Formula One.
Never. It was a glitch in the matrix. Perfect storm of failure and genius.
A glitch, a ghost, and a legend. Daksh, thank you for taking us back to 2009. And to our listeners, if you ever see a white car with a fluorescent yellow stripe, just remember sometimes the underdog actually bites. I am Nidhi. This is the Paddock Intel. Lights up. Thank you for watching this episode. If you like it, then like, comment, share, and subscribe to SAE-VIT. Thank you.